Welcome to our second panel of today. This is a topic that is of no less importance, health. This panel is going to discuss how we can deliver on the promise of AI-enabled healthcare, specifically what is the reality behind the AI as good as doctors headlines, among other topics. Our panelists will address the critical questions that need to be answered if AI is really going to transform healthcare. They're going to consider the issues that are faced by innovators, regulators, health providers, and patients, and explore the promise of AI-enabled healthcare. This session is chaired by Professor Alastair Denniston, consultant ophthalmologist and honorary professor at the University of Birmingham. Our panel includes Bilal Mateen, Executive Director of PATH, Rupa Sarkar, Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Digital Health, and Dr. Xiao, Senior Clinician Scientist at the University Hospital, Birmingham. The panel will be, as our previous panel was, 45 minutes long, and will include questions and answers. We will have a short coffee break after that with refreshments served outside, and our panel after that will start at 4:10 p.m. I will say, this won't apply to anyone. There's no point in me saying if you come in late, take a seat, don't stand over there. You're already here. You're here early. Should I say if there is any sort of event, then the fire assembly point is between the CKK building and Cooper's restaurant. Hopefully that won't be an issue. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alastair. Thank you very much.
That's great. Well, thanks very much for the invitation. It's lovely to be with you here today. So, yes, quite a big brief we've got. We will try and cover as much as we can together, all of us, in this 42 minutes now, and but looking forward to this time together. So, just to give you a bit more context of where we all sit in this sort of AI and health ecosystem, I'm going to give the panel a chance to introduce themselves and give a bit more about their role. So, Bilal, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Alastair. Hi all, it's a pleasure to be here. I have the privilege of running an international organisation or initiative called Digital Square, which is housed within a broader INGO called PATH. We service about 26 countries the world over. There's about 140 staff, and over the last 7 years since we were founded, we've managed to catalyse about $150 million in investments supporting the digital transformation of health systems, largely focused on low and middle income countries and low resource environments. So the relevance here is I trained as a physician, have had the privilege of having an academic post in the field of machine learning for health, but we're now really thinking about, as we support the development of national digital health infrastructure in several parts of the world, what is the opportunity for the application of artificial intelligence in supporting healthcare delivery at the last mile?
Thanks, Bilal. And Xiao?
Hi everyone, my name's Xiao. I, like Bilal, am also originally trained as a medical doctor. I spent a number of years working as an ophthalmologist and then did a PhD in diagnostic test evaluation at the time for ophthalmic applications, but got quite interested in AI, particularly deep learning methods applied to medical imaging at the time. Now my interests are around how do we safely deploy algorithms into healthcare systems, and how do we regulate them and evaluate them. I spent a little bit of time in industry as well, so I was a health scientist at Apple working on wearable health technologies, and now also do a lot of work with policymakers, so medical device regulators, our health commissioners, work a lot with journals as well, so I'm a deputy editor at New England Journal of Medicine AI. A little bit of everything, but really interested in how we function well as an ecosystem to bring technology through to patients.
Thanks, Xiao. Rupa?
I'm Rupa Sarkar. I am the Editor-in-Chief of the Lancet Digital Health. So for those of you, well probably everyone, might not know what the Lancet is. It's a medical journal that's published across the whole range of medicine, particularly prominent during COVID, where we published the first reports of COVID from China, And the Lancet has a number of subspecialty journals. So the Lancet Digital Health is one of them, and we focus on all technology in healthcare, really trying to work with our community, so Bilal, Alastair, Xiao, to help develop standards and help really ensure that AI or other technologies have clinical application within the systems that we're working with. I myself, actually, I'm not a medic. I'm a scientist, or I was a scientist. My background is actually in stem cell biology, so I'm a molecular biologist. How I got here is a story for another day.
Thanks, Rupa. Okay, so with that sort of context and the sort of views across the sort of global AI health system, we're just going to explore a couple of key areas together and then open it up for questions. So, Rupa, if we start with you, but we'll explore it all together, how do we get a health product from a sort of concept of, okay, we've got this problem over here, which we think we can solve with AI health technology. How do we get that concept all the way through to kind of routine clinical use?
That's a very big question.
You can take whichever bit of it you like.
I think my colleagues here are going to sort of really explain the different parts. But in terms of the journal aspect, I think you probably have all read papers in journals, and you know what journals do, or at least one part of what journals do, which is communicate science to different audiences. So for the Lancet, we communicate science to clinicians, to the general public. We ensure that the study's findings are very clear, that they're not overstated. But then another part of the work that we do at journals is to really ensure that the work that we publish is embedded within principles of evidence. So in medicine specifically, I think there's many studies that you'll see that say that research in medicine is rubbish. 85% of studies that are published in medical journals are a complete waste of time, and it's caused a lot of waste, it's caused a lot of human toll on spurious findings in research. And this is generally true, I would say. And what we do at journals is try to embed some of the evidence-based principles that have come out of the issues that we've understood from research waste. So evidence-based medicine as a theory came about probably in the 90s, I think, and there are 3 principles. So the first is that there is a hierarchy of evidence, basically. Not all evidence is equal. So, and in medicine, that you will see, maybe if you've ever been to a medical conference, you'll see like a triangle, and at the bottom there'll be cohort studies, case studies of single studies. Then as you go up, there'll be randomized controlled trials. This is the pinnacle for clinicians, where you're able to control the environment and you're able to test one thing, whether that's a treatment, whether that's an AI intervention, whatever it is. So that's the first principle. We're looking for controlled experiments in order to make decisions on. So the second is, one piece of evidence is great, but really we should be looking at the totality of evidence. We should be looking at systematic reviews of RCTs. We should have clinical experts who can really translate what one piece of study means and put it into the context of the work that's gone before it. So that's the second principle. And then the third principle is that, if you're a clinician in a hospital and you have a patient in front of you, there are other factors that come into it other than evidence. There's a context that you're in, there's the location that you're in, there's the patient themselves and their preferences and their values, and that plays into how you behave and how you make your decisions as a doctor. So with this in mind, going back to the question, I feel like I've gone on a tangent, but what we do at journals is try and ensure that the evidence that clinicians have is the best that they can have. So when we launched the Lancet Digital Health, so the Lancet itself is over 200 years old, but the Lancet Digital Health is 5 years old, and when we first launched, Alastair and Xiao published a seminal systematic review of AI studies in medical imaging. They showed that 0.1% of studies actually showed clinical validity and superiority compared to clinical standards. And so this really set the baseline for the field. We already knew that there was a lot of hype around AI in every single field, but especially health. and this set the sort of tone for what we did next, which is try and develop standards, guidelines that now all of our studies adhere to and are mandated against. So to answer your question, the first thing is we need rigorous studies to be able to then give advice to whether it's clinicians, but in the next chain it will be regulators that allow further use, and patients themselves as well.
Rupa, before I hand it on, do you think that over the time that your journal's been running, that you've seen a change in the quality of studies going through?
Yes. We still see, we've always seen a lot of proof of concept studies. So these are the headlines that you see, you know, AI is going to diagnose breast cancer, and we're not going to need radiologists anymore. So these are these proof of concepts that we're seeing that you know, edge towards these headlines, but are not the full story. But now we're seeing a lot of randomized controlled trials. And this is great, but like I said, we're looking at evidence in totality. And we actually published a review from Eric Topol and some experts in the field that show that these randomized controlled trials that we're seeing a lot more of are often single-centered. They have no generalizability, so we don't know if these AI models will work outside of that, study outside of that population. So there is a lot more work to be done. We've come a long way, but and we're excited, but not too excited. Let's not get too excited.
So we should hold that point about generalizability, that we make sure we unpack that in the health context at some point. So that's a note to self and note to panel. But Xiao, over to you.
Yeah, I think just to kind of riff off what Rupa was saying, it's worth remembering that in healthcare we have a really well-established system for development and evaluation and monitoring of, say, drugs, which we've had for a long time. And AI as medical interventions is really not all that different. So there are a couple of papers actually that comparing the pathway from proof of concept, development, validation testing, regulatory approval, and then post-market monitoring for drugs. That is a model that's really well established, and the evidence generation along that entire pathway is really important within healthcare, because we have a duty of obligation to our patients that what we're practicing within healthcare and the interventions that we provide are evidence-based. And so I think one of the things maybe to highlight is that not everyone that creates AI as a medical device will publish their evidence. And so you kind of have both ends of the spectrum. You have sometimes research groups or perhaps research coming out of industry that are publishing Nature papers. I think one of the earliest ones for skin cancer diagnosis was published in Nature in 2017, 2018 or something like that. I don't think that algorithm is being used in patients as far as I know, and there were lots of examples of this around that time where there were really high impact papers showing technical capability applied to a medical field, but those algorithms have not, the vast majority of them have not come through into patient care over the last 5-6 years. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you've got companies that are creating algorithms and they're bringing them to the regulators. They have evidence, they're doing their testing, they're showing results, they've got post-market monitoring plans, they are deploying in hospitals, in patients, but there's no publicly available evidence for scrutiny. So obviously regulators will be scrutinizing the evidence, but we as a community as a whole aren't able to. So we kind of have this both ends of the spectrum. And I think certainly in the UK, we are lucky in that our health system is governed by a number of centralized sort of gatekeepers. So for example, if you want to implement an AI solution in hospitals in the UK, we have a procurement framework, we have a health commissioner that will do, that has a system for doing health technology appraisal and a certain evidence bar that needs to be met, and they will ask for peer reviewed publications, they will ask for those results and that evidence. And that's not the same around the world. So I think we are beginning to see more and more mature, so that pyramid that Rupa was talking about, wind back 3 or 4 years, we were hardly seeing any randomized control trials. Last time we looked, we did a piece of work around this in 2021, 2022, and at that point we found about 65 randomized trials. compare that to over 700 FDA-approved AI algorithms for healthcare, that's quite a big difference. And then also hold that information in the context of the fact that drugs all need randomized controlled trials before they can be sold on the market. There is something within software and AI that we are not matching the same evidence standard as we do for drugs.
Yeah, before we come to you, Bilal, I think I'll just really, if that's something that you're not aware of, I think really note that point around the way that AI as a medical device is coming through and being used without necessarily the same level of scrutiny and evaluation and evidence that we would expect from other devices. Before we actually no, Bilal, you can take this. It's not, sorry, you're not,
Can I give you an example just to help
on.
you anchor on what you just said? So,
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you in the room will be familiar, I expect all of you on stage are, but the first computer-aided detection tool, so diagnostic aid for breast cancer, was approved by the FDA in the mid-1990s, right? The first multiple center randomized controlled trial that has at its primary outcome interval cancer risk, so bringing women through screening, both with the aid, without the aid, and then seeing who with the aid then goes on to get cancer versus those who don't, right? That's the gold standard we should really be looking for the value that these tools can provide in the healthcare system. The first multiple center RCT, not published in Lancet Digital Health, but Lancet Oncology last year. Right, almost.
You published the second one.
Yeah. Almost 30 years on, right? It's taken us a profoundly long time to catch up to a framework for evidence generation that we have seen as canonical in the pharmaceutical industry for a long time. Why? I don't know. There is some degree of exceptionalism in the digital space that we could do with less of. But, Alastair,
I was going to ask you that
Yes.
question. So why is AI being treated differently in the medical space?
Why is it being treated differently? I have a whole bunch of hypotheses, right? I don't have the right answer, I think, but I'll give you a couple of the reasons why I think it might be different. The first is we've kind of changed the manufacturing process. How it tends to happen in the pharmaceutical industry is you do get a lot of innovation in universities, but you've got these massive massive pharmaceutical companies that will take what's coming through the university R&D pipeline, bring it into their own R&D pipeline. They've got 100 drugs going at any given time, and they figured out the economics of you can take a bet on 100 drugs, take them through the process, and you need one to win, and then you need to charge an exorbitant amount for it to pay for this entire process. We could, in the next hour, pull out my laptop, access an openly available data set, and generate probably a useful clinical algorithm and publish it openly, and people would be able to access it, right? The democratization that we have achieved in the digital health space is both an incredible boon to what innovation is possible. It's also probably the scariest thing about it, right? Because the safeguards that existed that were institutionalized in the pharmaceutical process weren't, and we can circumvent them quite easily. And so we are playing catch up, right? We are having to figure out what good looks like and then create the statutes, the legislation, the policy that gives the regulators the mandate to go after this. And to the point that was being made earlier, for a long time it was a gimmick, right? We saw really interesting papers and no real commitment to translation. And it's really only been the last 5 years where suddenly it's not just one clinician in a hospital somewhere doing something interesting. This is now an at scale. There is potential value here, and governments are throwing money at the development of this technology. And so there is a need for safeguards. That's one piece, that like the manufacturing of this technology or these tools is different to what it has been in the past. The other piece is, I don't know what the other piece is, I'll be honest with you.
No, I can throw it open.
Throw it over. I'm curious to hear what my fellow panelists think, but there is something in the water and it has been there for so long.
To play devil's advocate.
Yes.
It's not that different from other forms of research. So you say the first, CAD, the first computer-assisted diagnostic tool came out in the 90s, and only now we're seeing prospective RCTs. But only now do we have the computational power needed. Only now have we worked on iterations of those studies to come to something that could actually be clinically useful. And those two studies actually showed that this tool will be useful in a very specific setting, in a second read, in Sweden. It will reduce radiologists' workload, but it's not better than current standards. It matches current standards. So, you know, it's still small. We're still working on small bits. You know, 20 years isn't a long time in healthcare. It's not a long time to develop a drug. It's not a long time to show efficacy. So I don't think that anything is going wrong. I think that things are going right.
Okay, Xiao?
You weren't expecting me to say that.
No, I'm happy you did. I'll let Xiao jump in.
So come with the third different answer. Yeah.
I mean, I think that from a technical point of view, and I'm saying this just to fill in gaps and like this myriad of arguments that we're presenting, is I think from a technical point of view, like we do know that trials take a while to do, and we do know that if we were to slot in this mandatory part of having to do a randomized trial at pre-market approval, that it does somewhat cut the legs out from under the technical capabilities of AI, in the sense that you know we know that there are generalizability issues with data drift and data shift. So and many of these algorithms are dependable upon some sort of hardware, so X-ray machines, cameras, fundus images, that, you know, hardware of some sort, which does also update and change and age and create changes in the data sort of distribution. And so the question also is then the algorithm that you have at the point at which you're doing that trial versus the one, I don't know, 1-2 years down the line, once you finish the trial and you actually submit it to the regulator, they take a year to get back to you, blah, blah, blah. 2-3 years later, is it actually still going to work as well? So at the moment, we don't have yet the flexibility in the regulatory mechanisms to allow us to not have these static algorithms that meet approval, assessed, approved, deployed. And it's only in the last year or two that we're starting to look at models like predetermined change control plans, which allow manufacturers to pre-specify updates and changes to the algorithm to try and to respond to changes in data distribution that then might provide an answer for better evaluation upfront rather than a bit later.
So I think if I can just echo another key point there, there's something around the how we evaluate these technologies and making sure that we are robust in that, not getting completely driven by a narrative, which is this is a shiny, exciting thing, which we know can be very clever. So not just taking the best case scenario. And the reason we can't just take best case scenarios is when AI helps you find songs that you'd like to listen to on Spotify, that's not a safety critical application. And what we're talking about here within health are safety critical. Even if it only goes wrong in 1 in 10,000 times, you know, that could be somebody's life at stake. So we have to think very seriously. And we have, as you've all pointed out, we have experience of that in other applications like drugs and so on. So with that in mind, so we talked about how we've evaluated it. How good is AI really today? Like, Xiao, why don't you start this one?
How good is good enough? That's actually a very difficult question to
You can
answer.
just pass it on.
Well, different ways to answer that. It seems to be good enough to get regulatory approval. And by the way, what happens during that process is, as a manufacturer, you when you're getting regulatory approval for something new, you do a literature review for what they call state of the art, and what you have to show is that this new thing that you're putting forward is equivalent or better than that. And for AI, and particularly as most of these are kind of diagnostic tools, it tends to be benchmarked against some kind of human performance. So if it's like a radiological, breast cancer diagnosis thing, you typically benchmark it against human accuracy of some sort. So the majority of those coming through have probably demonstrated a level of evidence that they can at least benchmark against human performance. How good are they? it also depends on, I think, for whom, and I think, I know that we may come on to talk about issues of bias later on, but it may also be worth just mentioning that when you submit a device, anything, a drug device, anything, you have to specify what your intended use population is. And you then have to supply evidence to show, so if your intended use population is all adults between the ages of 30 and 50 who have prostate cancer or something, not adults, men, you have to show clinical evidence within that cohort. And what we know of AI is that it may perform better in some individuals than others, depending on whether or not they are represented within training data sets and whether that's a distribution that the algorithm's been trained to learn. And what we don't do at the moment is make sure that it is equivalently good for all of these different subgroups. So there's kind of that aspect of it as well.
To help people anchor on a real use case in their mind of where AI might be usable today, do any of the three of you want to call out some examples where you think it's probably ready or nearly ready for routine use?
Diabetic retinopathy screening in the community, I think, is one of the earliest examples we saw come through the R&D pipeline. And there's, I think, and this goes back to the first question you asked us, taking that concept to the bedside. I think it's important starting with a concept that is important at the bedside.
Yeah.
There are so many widgets that we create that were made for the fun of it because information was available, but weren't really informed by a clinical need. I think this one is, right? We know that there is a growing burden of non-communicable diseases. Diabetes is one of the biggest I think balance sheet issues we are going to experience in high-income countries, and more effective screening could actually save people from treatable, preventable blindness through better optimization of their cardiovascular risk factors.
So diabetic retinopathy, anything else that you would call out?
So diabetes is a good one. So the closed loop systems people use for insulin delivery, they're based on AI tools that we've published a few of. There's quite a lot of trials and they're being used in patients. Obviously the breast cancer screening papers, they're currently used as a second reader in Sweden, as we talked about.
Ovarian cancer.
Yes, we published a paper a couple of months ago on ovarian cancer too. So a lot of screening.
Hollow detection, gastroenterology.
Yeah. So anywhere where there's images, basically, where there's data that allows you to screen or diagnose or prognose risk. I think risk development is an interesting one because we use it. We've always used it in hospital systems for emergency departments, for example, and now bringing AI into it. We don't really know how the AI is determining risk, but it's still being used, and that is another place that we're seeing it. I mean, I would say quite a lot of places probably that you don't actually see as well. So a lot in healthcare efficiency and workforce efficiency, a lot within the electronic health record systems, and that's going to get even bigger now that we have large language models, especially in areas where language is a big part of the disorder, for example, mental health. But you asked, what are we seeing? We're not yet seeing that, so I'll stop.
Brilliant. I think just before we open it to general questions, Xiao, I think you mentioned bias. Do you want to just open that up and share kind of some key points around thinking about bias in the context of healthcare?
Yeah, so I'm going to start backwards because I think sometimes the bias discussion can become a little bit disjointed. We can talk about lots of different aspects of it in terms of bias in data, bias in the algorithm, bias in the problem definition and the teams that are constructing. There's lots of discussion around it. But in healthcare, ultimately the thing that matters is the outcome for the patients. And everything kind of tracks backwards from that. And so there's a lot of, I know there's a lot of research in fair ML and debiasing algorithms and fairness trade-off questions and things like that. In healthcare, the nice thing is that if we take a whole pathway approach, and think of the algorithm just as one component of that, then actually it doesn't really matter if the algorithm itself is biased, because you can create a system where you redress issues of bias by providing, for example, alternate treatment pathways, alternate diagnostic pathways, by prioritizing those who may suffer from as a result of the underperformance of algorithms that exhibit underperformance. Yeah, I mean, we have done a lot of work looking at bias in data sets. That's a big problem in healthcare. There are lots of publicly available health data sets, which is a wonderful resource for research, innovation, but they tend to be concentrated in North America, Europe, a lot in China, very little in Africa, and very little from Australia, New Zealand, those regions in the world. And that's partly reflective of the infrastructure and the R&D efforts that are happening in those countries, and also the health infrastructure in terms of places that have screening programs, for example, that naturally generate a lot of data. But then when you couple that with where the health needs in the world are, that's quite at odds with each other. And so do we have this system where in places where we're generating lots of data, we're able to do more research and innovation, we're able to create algorithms that then only work in the populations that are represented from where the data is coming from, that we know probably won't generalize very well to places where potentially the health needs are greatest. So we have this kind of disparity issue in terms of the distribution of health data that can create like an ever-growing problem of then not being able to create innovations in the areas where we need it.
Thanks, Xiao. We're going to open it for questions, so if you wave, then I think a roving mic will come wending its way towards you. And while that's happening, do either Rupa or Bilal anything to add?
I just wanted to add a story about bias. So we published a paper last year, maybe the year before, my memory is bad, by Judy Gatroya and her group, and what she showed was, so she was looking at chest x-rays. So as a human, you would never be able to tell what race or ethnicity or gender this person was, maybe gender, but they looked at algorithms, and they saw that these algorithms were able to determine self-reported race in every single kind of imaging modality that they looked at. They introduced corruption into the images. It could still identify race and ethnicity. And the point of this exercise wasn't that all AI knows, could smell race and ethnicity, but it was that all AI have underlying biases that they couldn't figure out what was contributing to this determination. They've done this across numerous different modes of data, so including patient notes, things you're able to read it and you can't tell what the race, ethnicity, gender is, and an AI can. So it's an interesting dilemma, because we don't know what the AI is doing, and it's a huge problem.
Did you want to come back?
Yeah, I would just say one other thing. If we look at it from the flip side, we know that our health system, the way that we practice medicine, the kind of social environment that we live in, has health inequalities embedded within it. So it makes sense that that is reflected in data. And one of the potential benefits of algorithms that do show these kind of disparate performances when they train on data that is perfectly reflective of the real world is that actually it can uncover biases within our medical practice that can be extremely informative. And it's a little bit like, it's a little bit like holding up a mirror of the way that our health system currently functions, and those that do well, those that don't do so well, and that can be a very powerful tool for good. And then, in the way that we then react to that is not necessarily anything to do with the algorithm or the data, because you cannot fix health inequalities by fixing the data. That's just covering it up. Is then to look at what we can actually do to address those health inequalities that we may have been somewhat blinded to.
That's beautiful, but I was going to add that our competitor, a very beautiful journal, Nature Medicine, published a study last week that showed that they used Gen AI, so the model behind LLMs, to make synthetic data that helped overcome some of these biases. And I thought it was a really good paper. But now that you've said what you said, I thought, oh, are we going to use AI to?
So,
It'll be super good.
you're treating the symptoms, and Xiao was treating the underlying disease. No, but brilliant. Yes.
I'm Bernhard von Stengel, currently head of mathematics, and I'm asking, in my experience as a long-time journal editor, about something that might not be so relevant about AI in the publishing process. I'm very much in favor of peer review. I mean, and I agree with you also. I mean, Rupa, that if you would discard the bottom half of the journals, we would be all better off. Seriously, but I wonder whether there's a lot of now predatory journals. This is not a threat for the Lancet, but there's a lot of flooding the market in journals, because for many careers you need just quantity of publication. And it's very hard to control that, and I wonder whether AI can either be used to improve that, maybe the peer review process, or whether you see a threat that it should be much more better monitored to not have fraudulent or fake research going on. This is something actually general for not just medicine, but I think it's an important element in our way how we communicate as scientists. And also I think, peer review, the journals are often just an archival thing and something to get promoted. My impression is also that conferences and so on, and practitioners are also, it's way more important to spread the actual news and about what works, and the journal articles are more documenting what you can then cite, but the actual transmission of the thing is not necessarily via journals. This is a separate issue, but a general question about AI in the journal publishing process.
Oh, you're a journal editor
I know,
also.
but you're editor-in-chief.
Well, you can both answer, but Rupa, why don't you go first? Yeah.
Really interesting question. Yes, I am afraid I will be replaced very soon. In fact, actually, I'm hoping, I'm praying, please. No, I'm joking. Yes, AI has a place in streamlining some of the work that we do in research. So whether that's writing, I think that a lot of our papers now declare when they use a large language model to help them write their paper, what they've used it for, how they've used it, which version they've used, all of these questions, which I'm sure will become moot in like a year. But it's interesting to see it being used by our authors. We don't allow, publishing rules don't allow it to be used for peer review, but I'm sure that will change in the future. In terms of editorial processing and screening papers, that's still humans for now, that's still me for now. But they will be used as tools to help you determine what to read and when to read it. I know that the Lancet is owned by Elsevier. Bilal informed me today, and Elsevier owns Scopus, which is a tool to, I don't know if you've used it, but it's a tool to find research, and it's a really good one actually. It's not just because I work there, but they're making an AI tool. I don't know if I'm supposed to tell you, but there we go. They're making an AI tool to make Scopus, to make things easier to find. I feel like the next step is that the AI will write all the papers and do the systematic reviews and then publish itself on Scopus. So we'll see if that's the future. But we still need to read it, right? Somebody needs to read it. So
Maybe.
the AI will read it and then spout more out. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, did I?
But you see it as a positive tool.
What are you thinking, Xiao? Where do you go?
I think it depends on how you use it, right? Like, I do think there is some degree of sort of creative thinking that also happens in the discourse between like the reviewers and the authors as well. That would be such a shame to lose. So yeah, New England Journal of Medicine AI, there's also been discussions around whether we have AI as a peer reviewer as well. And I think a lot of the more administrative check type tasks can probably be taken by AI in a helpful, productive way. So, yeah.
You actually look like you're not a journal editor, but
I'm not a journal editor, but I do have a question for both of you, and anchoring on something that you said. It was specifically that word archival. And I think that comes from maybe your background in mathematics compared to medicine, where journals play a very different role in the two communities, or at least that's been my experience. And at least from my vantage point, you're seeing a lot of innovation where in the medical space, the cutting edge work isn't coming out through journals right now. It's all going on archive, right? We've defaulted to the classical world of physicists and mathematicians. The cutting edge RME paper from Google Health, archive. James Zhu's paper, archive.
So preprints.
Preprints, exactly. And I'm curious whether the stranglehold, I'll call it, although it's been very useful. The medical journals
Neutral
have
language.
Yeah, neutral language. No. The audience should know that we do know each other all very well. So none of this is personal. But that critical role that you've played in helping us sift the chaff from the amazing work, how relevant that continues to be because of the pace of work that's coming out, how impressive it all is, and the fact that it's going on archive and we're all just reading it and reviewing it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of publishing models out there that will take papers from an archive-like model, like Welcome Open, and will do open peer review. I think, I mean, and Xiao, you can add to this, there is work that I would say we do. Here I am getting defensive.
No. I think you're very valuable.
But I think you're right. There's a lot of space for work to be. Now that technology has changed the whole model, I think it's completely right that publishing should change and will have to change. I mean, you know, Elsevier doesn't make enough money apparently, so we're going to have to change. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that will be.
One last question, actually. So time has flown by. Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Yehuda Darren from Citibank. I'm not from the field, but I found the stat that you gave quite striking of 7,000 FDA AI approved.
700.
Yeah.
700. Okay, but still 700 versus 25. And just to try to put this in context, try to think about how AI is different from digital health or health tech monitors or previous waves of innovation. What's the ratio there, and is AI significantly different from just tech tools used in the profession?
How would you give it?
Yeah, so there's a class of software as medical device, which many of those will fall under, and then recently has AI as medical devices emerged as well. I don't know the statistics on exactly how many software as medical device, so I imagine lots. FDA do a really nice job of actually labeling the AI ones for us and updating this list that they have done 3 or 4 times over the last few years. So, you know, because there's so much development around that area. But I imagine there's quite a large tranche of software. But the definition thing that you mentioned, I think can be quite fuzzy. And I think it can also be somewhat gamed, depending on whether your priorities are around like marketing or if you, or it's
I think, yeah.
Just to follow, so it means basically that this gap between RCTs and the regulators is really, it's been there for a while with tech, and just AI brought it up to the forefront and people are aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's happening on quite a few fronts.
Can I ask a question? How many of these FDA approved devices, are they direct to patients? Are they direct to people? Yeah. Okay.
No, I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know. So we're talking about like the wearables, the apps, and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
There will be a proportion. I don't know how many.
But that, I mean, an interesting point. So separate from the devices that go through regulators, there's as of last year there was 390,000 different health apps available online to direct to the consumer, and there was around 390 million downloads of those apps. So that's another area. Not all of those will be AI enabled, but that's another area that we're going to see, and that is some of those probably should be under regulatory control, but not currently. Sadly, I think we're out of time, so I think we just have to thank our panelists and thank you all for the discussion. Many thanks.